This episode of Distraction is sponsored by Landmark College in Putney, Vermont, where support begins in the application process and continues beyond graduation with resume help, interview preparation, and more through their Office of Career Connections. Learn more at lcdistraction.org. Landmark College. Learn your way. Succeed uniquely.
If I were going to give parents any advice, I would say work with your neighborhood, work with your friends to give boys a chance to play in a group without being constantly reproached, constantly interfered with, the way they are at school recess.
Hello, this is Dr. Ned Hallowell, and welcome to Distraction. As many of you know, although the podcast is called Distraction, the theme is connection, because the antidote to distraction is connection. And today's guest could be no one more perfect than someone to talk about connection. My dear, dear friend, Dr. Michael Thompson, who is a psychologist and beyond that, a very wise man. He's the author of the pioneering book called Raising Cain, Protecting the Emotional Life of Boys. And he's written many other books, one called It's a Boy, pretty much everything you ever wanted to know about boys. One about called Homesick and Happy, How Time Away from Parents Can Help a Child Grow. Another one about friendships called Best Friends, Worst Enemies. He's a prolific author, but more than that, he's a friend to children and parents everywhere, and really has been giving talks around the country, around the world for 30 years now, and is an amazingly helpful consultant mainly to independent schools, but schools everywhere. He's made it his life's work to understand childhood, parenthood, with a particular focus on boys. Michael is a consummate connector and is a very close personal friend of mine, but I can promise you, listeners, you will feel like you have a friend on the other end of the airway in Dr. Thompson. So, Michael, welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you, Ned. And your listeners should know the fact that I've written books as a result of Ned Hallowell pushing me to write. Over many years, your encouragement, coaching, and outright pushing got me to write. So,
well,
you were very inspired.
It was a little nudge, and
it was a constant nudge.
The energy was there, and it's a wonderful thing that you've done that. Well, let's see. You know, I thought I just want to sort of give you another nudge and let you start talking. What do you think about the situation boys, particularly boys in this country, find themselves in here in 2018?
Well, it's very difficult to talk about the problems of boys when there's a movement to stop sexual harassment by men, where the patriarchy seems still to rule, where there's misogyny seems to have a place in the United States government to say, you know, things are tough for boys. It doesn't sound like a winning argument. So I have to help your listeners think about it in this way. In Reviving Ophelia, the author whose name's slipping for me said that this society was toxic for girls. I then turned around and wrote a book that said that there are things that are hard in society for boys. Dan Kindle and I wrote Raising Cain, and we looked at a lot of the risk factors for boys. Both things are true. There are things in society that work extremely well for girls, school being one of them, things that are very tough on girls, their vulnerability to power and harassment and sexual predation, absolutely. There are also things that work extremely well for boys. They're given a lot of freedom. They're supported in a lot of ways, and there are things that do not work well for them at all. 2/3 of suspensions and expulsions in the public schools in the United States are boys.
Really?
Boys are over-diagnosed with learning disabilities. Many boys are sent into special education because their teachers don't want to deal with them. They don't want to deal with their high activity levels. And boys of color African American boys are at particular risk for being sent into special ed, never getting the math they need to apply to college, of suffering from low expectations by teachers. An African American kindergarten boy has a 3% chance of graduating from college.
Really?
In Chicago, that's in the public schools of Chicago. I should have specified
well, that's still astonishing. 3%. 3%.
It's a terrible, terrible statistic.
Because it's probably not terribly different anywhere else than Chicago.
Well, not in inner cities with failing schools.
Right.
But look, if you're going to do well in school, your chances are enhanced by coming from a well-to-do family, being white, and being a girl. Your chances of doing well in school are much reduced from coming from a poor family and being black and being a boy. And there are feminist writers who write and say, no, the really big variables are demographic status, that is socioeconomic status, and race. Those have always been the big bugaboos in American education. And gender isn't that significant. It is that significant. It's significant in the United States, and what's interesting is that it has turned out to be quite significant in the first world. In all of the Western European countries now, a significantly greater number of university degrees and graduate degrees are going to young women than young men. In the United States, it's very plain. 56% of graduate degrees in the United States are going to young women. And 58% of college degrees are going to young women. Boys are down, or young men are down to 42% of college graduates. Now, what's interesting, because I'm a little older than you, Ned, is that when I've been around for 50 years. When I graduated from high school, more than 50 years ago, 58% of college graduates in the United States were young men, mainly young white men. And that pendulum, over the course of my life, has swung from one side exactly to the point on the other side. So it's now 58% of young women are college graduates in the U.S. Now, I can remember people making the argument, a persuasive and powerful argument, the girls were not graduating from college because there was systematic discrimination against girls. And they were right. You know, there were college counselors in high schools all over the United States who would send a boy to college and tell a girl she wasn't really college material, to go into home economics.
Or go to secretarial school.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. But now we have the that statistic has completely flipped. And I just read a manuscript by Warren Farrell, who was a controversial writer, wrote The Myth of Male Power and the Father-Child Reunion about fathers not getting custody of their children or equal custody after divorce. And so he's a controversial figure. He's stirred the pot, but he's written a new manuscript called The Boy Crisis. And he says there is a boy crisis. And the statistics for boys dying from suicide and accidents and drugs, all of these risk factors attach to boys much more than to girls. So our boys are at risk, and they're at risk for not getting the same educations as girls. They're at risk for having the system come down on them in a wide variety of ways. And, of course, boys of color are more at risk than anyone.
Well, before we talk about what to do about it, why do you think that is? Why these risk factors attaching so much more to boys than to girls?
Well, I've thought a lot about it, and I don't really know. Well, I know once we took the shackles off girls and allowed them to compete in school,
right,
they just hit the ground running.
And that's a big change during our lifetimes.
But yeah, if you look at the 50-year curve, if you can imagine the boys as a flat line going, kind of plugging along in school,
right.
Girls started way below them,
right.
And the girl line crossed the boy line. In 1982, girls began outscoring boys in school. Mm-hmm. It continued. They drew even in math and science. There are now more girls taking pre-calculus and calculus, and more girls taking SATs and ACT exams, mm-hmm. so that girls just really passed boys by, mm-hmm. and boys are eating their dust in school. Mm-hmm.
And that was with the passage of Title IX and the...
Oh, yeah. We started giving the encouragement to girls that we should have done. But one of the things, The Economist magazine wrote couple of years ago. We don't know why when we created a level playing field, the girls just started succeeding more than boys.
Right.
It's fundamentally a mystery. Is the girl brain a better fit for school?
Mm-hmm.
Is elementary school a better fit for girls than boys? Well, you know the answer to that question.
Sure.
Man.
Sure, it is. It is. And girls, elementary schools tend to be run by female teachers as well. So there's an insistence upon good behavior, which means obedience and doing what you're told.
Well, I started my career as a classroom teacher in middle school in rural New Hampshire.
Mm.
And I had a lot of boys who were jumping out of their chairs.
Right.
And unfocused, difficult, oppositional, challenging. And I was always interested that some of the boys who were the toughest to manage in a classroom would leave the classroom and go home and help their fathers on farms, would leave home, get a rifle, and go hunting for food for their families, and shooting squirrels out of trees and shooting deer, and were highly focused, helpful boys to their families, but were a real pain in the ass in school.
Yeah.
And I knew from my first years of teaching that it was impossible when you're a teacher not to wish part of every day or part of every week that the boys were just a little more like the girls because things would be easier. Right? The problem is if you make girl behavior the gold standard in the classroom, boys feel that.
Right.
And they feel discriminated against. And they feel that they're put in an unfair situation. Mm-hmm. The girls have an easier time sitting still. The girls have an easier time listening to language. The girls themselves in groups use language in a way that's more simpatico for what teachers want. Mm-hmm. Teachers don't want boys joking, shouting, and getting into competitive verbal contests.
Right, and making fart jokes and all that. Yeah,
there you go. And the girls will talk quietly and discuss their possible treachery against each other. Girls are not a fiction. But they are easier for teachers, and when teachers are up against boys for whom there are risk factors, like not having enough breakfast or not having enough limits and boundaries and attachment and connection at home.
Right.
These boys can be a real challenge in the classroom. I'm not denying that for a second.
Right.
But that's why they're at risk.
Right. So, and we would both certainly applaud absolutely taking the shackles off of girls. And isn't it wonderful how they've given the chance that they've taken it and run with it? But we somehow haven't made adjustments to make the classroom environment boy-friendly.
That's exactly right.
Well, so okay, let's get to the advice part. Let's say you're a parent of a couple of boys who are 8 years old, 12 years old, and 15 years old. Let's say 3 boys. What can you do as a parent aside from waiting for policies to change and consciousness to be raised and all that? What can you do to help your boys not feel bad about being a boy and negotiate school in such a way that they can succeed?
I think the biggest change in American childhood has been the loss of free, undirected play, mixed-aged free play. I think when boys were able to be outside and organizing their own games, it made them feel more competent. It made them feel more secure, made them feel less anxious. And what we find now is that our boys are constantly either inside because their parents don't trust them being outside, or they're in competitive sports. Well, competitive sports don't work for all boys. They certainly didn't work for me. And I have mothers who come up to me all the time now saying, well, my son isn't a very good athlete, and he's in town sports, but I don't know if he's... And I say to them, 50% of boys are of below average athletic ability. They're always stunned by that statistic.
Well, by definition.
The mythology is that all boys like sports.
Right, and that they excel at sports.
And that they excel at sports.
Right.
They're going to love it.
Right.
And that's just not true. Yeah. But all boys love play.
Right.
And the problem is that we don't have the kind of free play. So if I were going to give parents any advice, I would say work with your neighborhood, work with your friends to give boys a chance to play in a group without being constantly reproached,
right,
constantly interfered with, the way they are at school recess.
Yeah.
The boys are the ones in trouble all the time. The number one punishment for boys in public schools in the United States is taking recess away from them.
That's so stupid, isn't it?
It is so stupid. Yeah, you and I can agree on that.
Yes. They need to get out and run around. And
right.
When we were kids, we were told to go out and play.
Yes, and we'd have 2 hours a day of playing and then come home and do homework. That's a different boy.
Yeah.
The one who's been out playing with friends for 2 hours.
And supervising themselves.
Right, supervising themselves.
Right.
So we have a different life now in a different suburban community, and mothers aren't standing at the kitchen window looking out at the group of kids playing, and they're not all of these sets of eyes on them. And we have all of these fears of child sexual abuse and kidnapping, which the cable TV fans, these fears. And so our boys are in a much more constrained and fearful environment. And I think it makes them anxious. Mm-hmm. And I think it makes them feel mistrusted. Mm-hmm. And as much as possible, I would put boys in situations where they can play. In my book, It's a Boy, I was talking to a kindergarten mother. And her son went to a kindergarten in the basement of a church. But in the back of the church was a big sloping hill down to a big field with some woods and stuff like that. All the boys wanted to do was have their moms pick them up from school, but then let them play freely in the field.
Yes.
And the mothers had to change their schedules and their expectations, but the mothers organized to do that. And then the kindergarten boys could run down the hill. They've been looking out the window all day to see this hill, and they went down to play. And then this mother, and I write about her in the book, she said, the mothers then had to take a second step, which is that they had to stop supervising the play.
Yeah.
Right? The boys actually played with sticks, if you could imagine.
Right.
And the mothers were interfering constantly in the play. And the mothers taught themselves to turn their backs and let the boys play.
Yeah.
And I think if a parent were going to do something from early on, it was as safely as you can, but with as little supervision as you can, create places where boys can play. And if it means the dad's taking boys to a park on Saturday morning and the dad's all meeting with the boys and then turning their backs, or the dad's sitting and chatting among themselves, and let the boys play. And let them organize their games, let them exercise leadership. These are the things that make boys feel competent.
It's so true. It's let the ponies out of the corral and let them run free. So you're saying that's the number one priority if you're a parent of a boy.
Well, you're asking me what parents can do, even before, no matter what the school system does.
No matter what the school system does. Yeah.
The problem that I run into in schools is the fear that boys are going to get out of control.
Right.
That boys look. By school age, 3/4 of boys are more physically active than any girl.
Right.
Even though the brains of boys and girls, I believe, are 90% overlapping in their need, in their intelligence, their need for love. I don't believe there's a boy brain and a girl brain. That's rubbish. That's scientific rubbish.
Right.
But there are trends in boys, and one of them is their greater physicality and their greater impulsivity.
Right.
You'd be an idiot not to see that in schools. They can't sit still long, and they do dumb things because they're impulsive.
Right.
But impulsive doesn't mean dangerous.
Or bad.
It doesn't mean dangerous or bad. It just means impulsive.
Right.
So if you are afraid always that boys are going to become violent and get out of control, you intervene constantly with boy play. And I think it is possible to let boys play.
Yes.
And trust their development. The message that educators give is constantly, we don't trust your play, we don't trust you, and what boys hear is, you don't like us.
People don't realize play, I think, is the most advanced activity of the human mind.
And you, Ned, said to me years ago, and it was one of those moments, you've taught me a lot, but you said that you hate it when adults say, play is the work of childhood.
Yeah.
To justify play because it's really
work
preparation for college, And play is the mammalian, it's the signature mammalian behavior.
Yeah.
it is what is built into every child. And you see children. One of the reasons I wrote my book, Homesick and Happy, about summer camps and the first-time experience of being away from home is because I've seen children who are locked into their cell phones or locked into video games, and their parents are decrying this all the time. He's always on video games. But the truth is the parent is reassured that he's in the cellar, and she knows where he is. He's not outside in danger, right?
Yeah.
But when they go to camp, for the first 2 days, the kids miss the electronics, and then they start to play.
Right.
And the girls start to sing their songs and do their table banging with the elbows and the hands and all those chants that girls at camps do, and the boys start inventing games. And the 19 and 20-year-old counselors are not frightened by this.
Right. They love
just
it.
let them play.
And they can go off and do whatever they want to do. I mean, it's everybody win. I've told you my story about years ago. I consulted to the Harvard chemistry department because they had a bunch of depression and suicide. And one of the things I learned in my years there, every year a new cohort of grad students and postdocs arrive, and quickly they divide into two groups. They arrive in Cambridge, and the mandate is go into the lab and discover new knowledge.
Yep.
Well, one group runs into the lab, so happy at last to have all the resources of this amazing institution, mix chemicals and blow up the building or whatever. The other group freezes up, and they say, you've got to tell me what to do. I'll do anything. I'll stay up all night running your test protocols. I'll grade your papers. Do anything you want me to do, but you've just got to tell me what to do.
Right.
And those are the kids who lost the ability to play back around 5th grade, 3rd grade. They thought to succeed in life, you should do what you're told. And they did it very well. So they put up top scores, but their imagination and initiative atrophied.
Yep.
So we crippled them. But I love your wisdom. Well, let me move on to another topic that's, of course, near and dear to my heart. You know from your firsthand experience that a lot of normal boys might look like they have ADHD, but they don't. How do you help people resolve that?
Well, I have a University of Chicago definition of normal, which is the bell-shaped curve, right? When somebody says, is that normal, I visualize a bell-shaped curve, and I see that average line in the middle, right?
Right.
And then I see those two other lines on either side, the one standard deviation.
Right.
And then two standard deviations.
Right.
So when a teacher says to me, I have a very spacey kindergarten boy, or I have a very, very active kindergarten boy, I always say, is he more active than anybody else in the class?
Mm-hmm.
No, there are 2 or 3 like him.
Mm-hmm.
Right away, she's moved him back towards the middle line, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Or she says, no, this is the most hyperactive boy I've ever had. I say, how long have you been in teaching?
Mm-hmm.
3 years. I'm not impressed. She doesn't have a very large sample size. Right? If she says 23 years, then I perk up.
Right.
I want to know where this boy stands in relation to other boys.
Right.
And when a teacher, she may feel stressed by a kid in her class, and she says something to the consultant. But what I want her to remind her is that she can handle this in the normal course of the classroom, or maybe not.
Mm-hmm.
But when I get a teacher who's routinely finding 15% or 20% of the boys in her class annoying, that's not the boy's problem.
Right.
That's her problem.
Right.
And as a consultant, I need to talk to an administrator about her.
Mm-hmm.
And it isn't always her.
Right.
But in elementary school, it's mostly women. And there are women who just have trouble with boy activity levels.
Right.
And what the problem is that boys figure it out, that the teacher is kind of impatient, exasperated, and sometimes I've seen second grade boys organize, make war. I mean, they are capable of doing that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If the teacher is too mistrustful and punitive towards boys.
Mm-hmm. Then they'll gang up on her.
Yep, they will.
Yeah.
And then, of course, it's the prophecy's fulfilled.
Right. So do you see ADHD being both overdiagnosed and underdiagnosed?
It's overdiagnosed because very active boys are more likely to get hit with it. And because I don't think adults take time to investigate the inner life of boys who don't pay attention or space. They're often in their own imaginations, as you know. They're often thinking of something far more interesting. They're often extremely bright, and they're bored.
So
they've done the teacher a favor. They said, "I'm just going to be in my head here.
I'll check out of this
boring lesson." Right?
So your first advice is to get to know the child a little bit.
Of course. And find out where they go. When they're, but we think that the behavior, he's spacey. He wasn't paying attention when I was giving instruction. Right? Well, his internal experience was, I've heard this lady give this instruction 35 times before. Boring.
Yes.
Right?
Now,
and boys will tell you that what I have found in all the books I've written, and I know you find this is true, when you ask kids straightforward questions about their school experience, they will tell you how it is.
Yes.
If you shame them, they'll look at their feet and say, I don't know.
Right.
And you think, gosh, they're not informative.
Right.
But the way you ask matters.
Right. So if you can give them a chance to tell you the truth, they will.
Yep.
Without making them feel ashamed of it. Well, this has been so wonderful to...
I hope it's been useful for the people listening on our friendly conversation.
I can't imagine how it wouldn't be. It's you have to make a promise you'll be willing to come back and do this again someday.
Of course. Anytime, just ask me.
You're just a treasure trove of wisdom and experience. And one thing that's good about getting to be a little bit older as we are is we've seen a lot, and we still manage to keep up with the new stuff. So... Well, thank you for sharing all of this, Michael, your personal experience, your professional experience. I can promise you our listeners are grateful, and I'm sure they could also hear the warmth that comes through in your voice. It's a wonderful thing.
I always have fun with you.
Thank you. Me too, Michael. All right, well, take care, and we'll do it again.
All right.
Okay.
Bye, Ned.
Bye-bye. If you like what you're hearing, please take a moment to rate and review us on Distraction on the Apple Podcast. Now, let me tell you how to do that. You go to iTunes, and then you click on Podcasts, or you search Distraction Podcast. And then when you get to us, the Distraction Podcast, there's a little button you can click to put in a review. It's pretty simple, but if you don't know how to do it, you'll never get there. So go to iTunes, click on Podcasts, find Distraction, or search Distraction Podcast. Our site will pop up, and then there's a button you can push to write a review. If you do that, it really does help us, and it helps other podcast listeners find us. So if you like this growing community that we have, and I hope you do, please take a minute. Go to iTunes, click on Podcast, or search Distraction Podcast, and write a review saying, this is the greatest thing since sliced podcasts or whatever. Thank you so much. If you would do that, take the time to do that. As always, please reach out with your questions, comments, and show ideas. We absolutely depend on you. We'll answer your questions, we'll ponder your comments, and we will implement your show ideas. Pretty much guaranteed. I frequently answer your questions on the show, so please keep sending them in. Email us a note with your question or record a voice memo on your phone and send it to connect@distractionpodcast.com. That's connect@distractionpodcast.com. Or leave us a message by calling 844-55-CONNECT. That's 844-55-CONNECT. Distraction is produced by Collisions, the podcast division of CRN International. Collisions, podcasts for curious people. Our producer is the dynamic Sarah Girton. And our sound engineer is the marvelously talented Scott Person. And our music theme was created by the invisible man we never see, Mark Berman.